So, first time using this software, so I'm just going to do a little quick test here. Make sure everything's working properly. So, first time using this software, so I'm just going to do a little quick. There we go. That's working. Okay. Okay, let's see. We got anyone in the chat yet? Anyone watching? Give me a thumbs up if you're watching, so I know that there's people watching before I start. All right, I see some people giving a wave. There you go. Hi there, everybody. So this is my, I've done a live stream conversation with somebody. This is my first time trying to talk to myself. So if I'm a little bit awkward with it, just bear with me here. So basically what happened was I was sent a video of a Catholic YouTuber, Iron Inquisitor, who I don't know much about, interviewing an Orthodox Rabbi Landau. And I'm glad I waited a couple days to make the video because my initial reaction would have been a lot harsher. So I'm gonna give the benefit of the doubt here. Essentially, what happened was he basically gave the standard answers to a lot of things, which is fine, and I'm going to ignore most of that. Some stuff I do want to respond to, just to point out some things about the rabbinic position as he's portraying it. And then there are some things that I was surprised to hear him say, given that he seems to be a more orthodox end of the spectrum Orthodox rabbi, that I felt was misleading, because he's giving his opinion, which is fine. I appreciate his opinion on these particular matters, but he ignores the fact that most of the modern Orthodox Jewish world does not hold his opinion on these things. And so I wanted to point those out and show that there may be a little bit of a sleight of hand there, to try to make his stance. Well, his stance does look good. I appreciate his stance on those particular things, but trying to distract from the fact that there are many Orthodox Jews that don't have the best opinion on that, on those particular issues. And then I also want to talk about his stance on Jesus in the Talmud and the portrayals there. I want to be very clear from the outset. One, I think Jewish culture is great. I grew up as an Orthodox Jew. I have nothing against the Jewish people or against keeping Jewish traditions. I find a lot of value in Jewish culture and traditions, even though I don't believe in the rabbinic claims anymore. I don't think these are reasons to demonize Jews or attack Jews as a whole if you disagree theologically with the stances here. Nor are things said in the Talmud valid reasons to attack Jews either, if you understand what the Talmud actually is and what it's saying. It can say terrible things, or rather, the rabbis being cited in the Talmud could say terrible things, and it has no bearing on what Jews actually think or believe. So I do want to point that out. That negative things said about Christianity or about Gentiles in the Talmud are little opinions of specific rabbis. They're not a reason to demonize the Jewish people. Same thing with disagreeing theologically with Rabbinic Judaism. Not a reason to demonize Jewish people. It's a difference in opinion and stance there. You might think it's wrong. It's not a way to serve God, or it's not from God, whatever it is. It's not negative as a culture, as a heritage. It's not a reason to attack Jewish people over. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. With that being said, I get accused by fellow Jews of being a fake Jew because of my rejection of Rabbinic Judaism as authentic. And so what I did was, you'll notice, is it right here? You'll see the Restream logo. I purposely did not pay for the full version of the software. I'm using the free version to prove that I am authentically Jewish. So there's your proof. There's that. So I want to get into the video a little bit. I apologize if it's playing a lot of the video, because I don't want to cut them off and make it seem like I'm taking shorter snippets than necessary or than required to show the point that's being made before I respond. So there is going to be a little bit of playing this video, but I will be pausing regularly to interject. I have a few timestamps of things that I want to address, and we'll go from there. So let's see if I can bring this up here. And you all can hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up or a awesome or something that you can all hear me okay? And that you can hear the video okay?
What do you think of Jesus? Why do Jews reject Jesus?
I believe that the current state of Israel has experienced an enormous amount of divine providence.
Can you all hear me and the video properly? Is there a good balance between the two? You can hear everything? Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to let this play a little bit. And then as it becomes necessary, I will interject and respond to some things.
There's a big debate about it.
According to our tradition, the world as we know it will exist for 6,000 years, which means we have 215 years left.
If the Messiah came here today, 2025, what signs could we look for to confirm that is the Messiah? I would say this is probably one of the biggest points of contention between Christians and Jews online, and it specifically refers to a sort of cryptic verse in the Babylonian Talmud, a man named Jesus who is in hell boiling in excrement. What are your thoughts on that?
So, number one,
we are living in one of the most polarized times in all of history, from politics to culture to religion. And one of the biggest tensions I've seen online is Christianity versus Judaism. But what do Jews actually believe? In this video, I sat down with Joel Landau.
You're not going to get a clear answer from anyone about what Jews as a whole actually believe. That's an important thing to remember in all of this.
An Orthodox Jewish rabbi who holds a bachelor's degree in liberal arts and sciences, a teaching credential from Lipschitz College, and was ordained by the Chief Rabbinate of Jerusalem. He also holds a postgraduate degree in Judaic studies issued by the Chief Rabbinate State of Israel. The past few decades, he has served multiple roles, from nonprofits to AIPAC, to being a commander in the Tank Corps of the IDF. In other words, when it comes to Judaism, he's as legit as it gets. When I first met him,
Just need to pause there to say whatever else I might think of the rabbi. As a fellow veteran, tank guys are badass. So there's that.
I told him, I have some pretty hot
Not that I was a tank guy.
topic questions. And he was like, bring it on, I'll answer anything. I looked him in the eyes and I said, in this interview, don't worry about hurting my feelings. I only want to hear the truth. I'm so excited for you guys to listen to this episode. But before we start, whatever your opinion is, please be respectful. In the words of Jesus, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God.
All glory to God. Before we start this episode, you guys might notice we're actually not seated in a Catholic church. In fact, we are not in a Christian church at all.
The reason for that is that the rabbi, in all likelihood, would refuse to step into a church at all for doctrinal reasons. Just pointing that out.
We are actually in an Orthodox Jewish synagogue, and today we are joined by the Orthodox Jewish Rabbi Joel Landau. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing?
well, thank you.
Awesome. So let's just kick this right off and get straight to the question. So I understand you are an Orthodox Jewish rabbi.
I also forgot to mention, I think he said his name is Randall, the Iron Inquisitor, the guy doing the interview. His questions are really good. Like, he covers the gamut of things to find out and ask about. But obviously he's learning about Judaism here. He doesn't know much about it. He's not equipped to push back on some of the things being said or some of the way things are being portrayed. That's not fault of his. He doesn't know Judaism. That's what he's here to figure out. So there are times where he might himself or other people might think he's confronting the rabbi about something, but he's going nowhere into the depths of where he could go with it. Just simply, he's not equipped to do that, it doesn't seem.
What is the difference between Orthodox Judaism versus other groups like Reformed or Conservative Judaism?
Okay, so first of all, just so you know, it's reform, no ED. And they have this idea that they can reform Judaism, not too different from the Protestant Reformation.
Okay, I didn't even think to write this down as a timestamp or a note. Reform Judaism is not in any way comparable to the Protestant Reformation. Reform Judaism seeks to maintain Jewish culture, tradition, even to an extent observance of Jewish law, but for the most part removes the idea that it is actually divinely given, that it's actually from God necessarily. You don't really, it's very cultural as opposed to religious, not at all in the same way of the Protestant Reformation, reforming what they felt was a corrupt church, but still believing in God and divine inspiration of the scriptures and so on. Very, very different. A horrible comparison to make. I just want to point that out.
Where they were going to essentially reform Christianity. And up until the early part of the 19th century, all 99% of Jews were all Orthodox. And as a result of the period of the Enlightenment and the fact that Jews who up until that point were severely discriminated against, not allowed to participate in many aspects of society, especially in education, once those barriers were removed, and there was greater integration of Jews into the broader world, with that came an interest to reform Judaism. And initially it was just little things that they wanted to do. So for example, all of these services in Orthodoxy were being done in Hebrew, and if it was in Eastern Europe, it might have had Yiddish, which was it's a sort of Jewish Pig Latin, if you will. And it morphed from just trying to have sermons in the current vernacular to ultimately abandoning many fundamentals of our religion. One of which initially was the significance of Jerusalem. One of the founding rabbis of the Reform.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, just because this is not particularly something that I felt the need to address. The first thing that I want to do and actually give props to the rabbi here is this.
Practicing Reform Jews. Let me explain what I mean by practicing. As an Orthodox Jew, my life, from the moment I get up in the morning until the moment I go to sleep, is permeated with my religion. It manifests itself in the first words that come out of my mouth when I wake up, and the last words I speak when I go to sleep.
So this is an interesting point that he's making. In Orthodox Judaism, there's a lot of ritualistic stuff, and there are times to do certain things, and it starts with waking up in the morning, and then with the last words you say at night, with the Shema and so on. This is a good thing. Anyone that believes in God, anyone religious, should start and end their day with God, obviously. So this is a positive aspect of this, but the idea that most Orthodox Jews have their day-to-day life permeated with godliness or religious practice throughout the day, it depends who you're talking about. Most people are not thinking about this stuff throughout the day. There are ritualistic things to do that's not necessarily permeating every aspect of your day. So, but I do think it's a good thing that he's pointing out there that his day starts and ends with godliness, with God. I'm going to fast forward a bit here to the first thing that I want to actually address and critique.
The formulation of the Jewish Bible. So our Bible consists of Genesis, which we share in common, so to speak. And it goes all the way from Genesis up and through the beginning of the Second Commonwealth. So we're talking roughly a vicinity of 400 BCE. We're talking about the latter books are going to be the books of Chronicles, the book of Daniel, When it comes to the prophets, also what we call the minor prophets, not quality but quantity-wise, we have Malachi, Zechariah. They are all in that last vicinity of time. Now, in their lifetime, those two I just mentioned, also the book of Ezra, and we call them Nehemiah, you typically say Nehemiah. So in that vicinity of time, there was a formulation of the great
Interviewers like, that's some pretty cool Hebrew, man.
synod, or the men of the great assembly, which consisted of 120 individuals, among them some of the prophets I mentioned, as well as leading scholars.
So this is where I have to stop things. The men of the great assembly, Anshe Knesset HaGedola, there's prophets, people like Ezra, Nehemiah, Nehemiah, as he mentioned, priests like Shimon HaTzadik. There are people that are the leaders of the generation. But he adds that great scholars part. Now, they may be scholars, but that terminology specifically is alluding to rabbinic scholars, I believe. That's generally what they're alluding to. It's kind of trying to put the claim that those people were part of the rabbinic tradition, which is anachronistic. It's not true. Later, you have Pirkei Avot, you have documents in the Mishnah claiming that the tradition of the rabbis goes back to that great assembly. But it's simply a claim of a much later group of people and document. There is obviously some continuation, but there are so many sects within Judaism at the time of the Second Temple, for them to then, once everyone is wiped out by the Romans and they're the last man standing, claim that they are the authentic tradition that goes back to that great assembly is simply it's simply not true. It's a claim that you'd have to accept completely on faith in the rabbinic tradition, that what they're saying is actually true, that they are the descendants, not the descendants literally, but the rabbinic descendants of that great assembly.
And they canonized the Jewish Bible. And there were a variety.
This is, again, a faith claim. You'd have to accept that happened. There's evidence to show there are major discrepancies in which groups believed in which canon of scripture. There are discrepancies in textual variations between documents at the time. The Masoretic text claims it's completely unchanged all the way back to Moses. It's not even the same alphabet. So again, to claim that it was fully canonized then, and that's what Jewish scripture is simply not true. You'd have to accept on faith that rabbis of the 2nd century and onwards are telling the truth about that, with no reason historically to believe it. There's even books that are rejected by the canon of Jewish scripture that are quoted in the Talmud. So it's really odd to make this claim. It's completely anachronistic. They're claiming that the rabbinic system goes back to that great assembly, and the same canon of scripture that was canonized then exists all the way to the Masoretic text. And it's simply a false claim.
Variety of debates as to what should be put in and or not put in. There were debates about the book of Ezekiel, because there are contradictions between that and things that are stated in the 5 books of Moses. There were debates about the Song of Songs because of its sensual, sexual nature. And there were debates about a few other books. But in the end, they made determinations, and as of that point, the Jewish Bible was sealed.
So I already addressed this. Simply not true. It's a faith claim. You'd have to accept that the rabbis are claiming this in the time of the Tanaim, in the time of the Mishnah, that their tradition actually goes back to the men of the Great Assembly, unbroken, that they're the only tradition that's authentic. And it's a complete faith claim. You'd have to believe those rabbis at the time that are changing other things for a lot of political reasons at the time. So take that as you will. So that's about the canon of Jewish scripture. I wanted to address that. I'm going to go forward a little bit here to talking about his claims about the oral law. Now, this rabbi is not saying anything far-fetched here as far as Jewish claims. He's basically stating the official stance of Orthodox Judaism. It's not the most interesting thing as far as this discussion. There's going to be more interesting things that we're going to get to. I do want to address it, though, because it is a big part of what I address in my videos in general. So let's go here to, I think it's 11.
Tradition, are they on the same level in terms of authority?
He's asking about the oral law and the written law, the like the Torah and the Torah Shebaal Peh, which is the oral law that the rabbinical tradition is supposedly based on.
So I want to share something with you that I think all of you are going to find quite interesting, maybe enlightening, and maybe challenging.
Definitely challenging.
I would suggest to you that there is almost nothing in Scripture that is in and of itself easily implementable.
Did you hear that? There is almost nothing in Scripture, almost nothing, not much of, not a lot of it, almost nothing that's easily implementable. This is an incredibly, I mean, he's taking it to an extreme. There is a Jewish stance here that's the regular Jewish stance on this, but he's taking it to an extreme here to say that there is almost nothing that's easily implementable. So we're going to get into a little bit, but again, this is something where you would have to presuppose on a faith basis the technical aspects that the rabbis are saying are part of the laws. You'd have to presuppose that there is a need for that. And then you need the rabbis and the rabbinical system and the oral law to explain how to do that. But it doesn't it's not actually necessary. Not only that, to say that there's almost nothing in Scripture that's easily implementable is so bizarre. Loving God, loving your neighbor, honoring your parents, he's going to address that and say, oh, it's not easy to understand what that means. Don't worship idols, believe in God. Like, all these different things are so, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of Scripture is pretty easily understood to some degree and some extent. Yeah, pretty hard to implement the Torah without a temple. This is true. This is very true. So I do want to point that out, and then we'll listen to how he explains it, and I'll show you why it's a ridiculous claim.
So what do I mean? If we see up there, do we see all the way up on top there, the 10 Commandments?
Yes.
Okay. So commandment number 5 of our top 10 is honor your mother and father. What does that mean? And I've tested this out. If we go around a room, people all have different opinions. Who's right?
Exactly. People have different opinions, but it's not necessarily saying that there's a specific ritualistic way to do it. So the fact that people might have different interpretations of what honoring your mother and father is does not mean God has a specific rule book of how to do that. It doesn't mean that there's an oral law that goes along with it to explain that. So this is kind of the basis for the rabbinic claim, is that how do you honor your mother and father? It just says honor your mother and father. It doesn't say how. This is forgetting the fact that there are some descriptions within the written law of how to do that. But who says that there is a technical aspect of it that needs to be fulfilled? Same thing with ritual slaughter. Who says that when God says slaughter an animal, that there's a specific type of knife and a specific methodology used? You're making something more complex than it needs to be, and then claiming that your system must exist in order to keep that system.
Right. Well, everybody says, well, we're all right. And then I typically say, all of us have had the following experience, where either mom or dad tells us.
And I'm just realizing now, well, I'm not realizing now, but I'm remembering that this is an important thing, that people might have different opinions, but intent is very important as well. And the rabbinic system almost implies that if you didn't have a ritual code book on how to do these things, there would be no way to fulfill it. And everyone would just do what their opinion feels right for them. And some people might be dishonest with that, let's say. But this is completely ruling out the fact, or excluding the fact, that God knows what's in your heart, and that you are beholden to what God tells you to do. And if your intention is to subvert the system, you're not going to trick God. And the rabbinic system seems to exclude that from the factors that are involved.
Go clean your room. And we go up to the room and we do what we think is going to pass as a cleanup job. You shove the socks there, the underwear there. And mom or dad comes, looks around, like, and they say, have you done it? And you say, yeah, I'm good. And they say, okay, great, I'm going to take a look. And then they're going to say, honey, look, when I said clean your room, I didn't mean not putting these in the hamper. So let me ask you, if mom and dad mean
YouTuber, the interviewer is like, yeah, that happened to me once.
Something when they say it, think God does also? So therefore what? In comes the oral tradition. And the way Orthodoxy understands how this worked is the actual scripture are considered the notes on the primary content of what Judaism is all about. So meaning, God explains verbally, orally, to Moses, the concepts of honoring mother and father. They are summarized in a few words. Honor your mother and father. As you all know, Jews circumcise their boys at 8 days old. You know what it doesn't say in the Bible?
What?
It doesn't explicitly say what you circumcise. Guess what? Maybe we've made a mistake all these years. Ow!
I'm going to try to avoid using the R word here. This is a mentally deficient claim to justify the stance of rabbinic Judaism. The idea that God would tell the Jewish people, keep in mind, we're talking about the written law from Moses, keep in mind that the Jewish people have already been circumcising from Abraham, and keep in mind that Abraham had direct revelations from God. So they would have known what it was from that standpoint, but also pagan nations around them were also circumcising. The idea that God would tell them circumcise and that they didn't know what that meant. What do you circumcise? This is a mentally deficient claim, a mentally deficient stance to take to justify the rabbinic system. The idea that the Jewish people or the Israelites at the time did not know what circumcision meant, and so you have to have a rabbinic law to explain what circumcision is. That's absurd. That is an absurd claim to make. Keep in mind that this then led to all kinds of rituals being added to circumcision. And again, I want to point out here, these are opinions in the Mishnah and Talmud. We don't have any excuse or reason to demonize Jewish people for this. But there was rabbis in the Mishnah that then put forth these ideas of traditions like sucking blood from the circumcision wound for medical reasons, which, because it's claimed by a rabbi of the Mishnah for medical reasons, therefore it's binding Torah law. And even groups in Judaism that are very modern and don't want to do that still use some kind of loophole way of doing it without actually doing it because it's binding Jewish law. So they have to have a way to do it without necessarily doing it. And this is all because the rabbinic system claims, well, there are rituals that go along with it, and we need the rabbis to tell us how to do that. And so all these weird, wacky traditions come out of that. I'm not going to address today some of the absurd things said by various rabbis in the Talmud or in the Mishnah. I also don't think it's relevant to this. But that's kind of the fruits of it, is that if you insinuate that there has to be this weird technical system that these rabbis from the 2nd through 6th century, essentially, in the bulk of it, are codifying and telling you how to do it, then you're going to end up with all kinds of wacky practices from the 2nd through 6th centuries. So unless there is a reason from the Torah to be doing that, you're just relying on a faith claim that these rabbis have authority from God to be doing that. And there's literally no reason for that. Again, there is a lot of beauty in Jewish culture and tradition. Obviously, some traditions go back to the Israelites, even First Temple and before. But that does not mean they're from God. That means they are traditions that developed by people within the Jewish culture. They might be wonderful traditions, a lot of them, beautiful traditions. I think it's great that people keep them. I find a lot of beauty in Jewish culture, but it's not, but there's no reason to believe that it's from God and the way that you fulfill God's will in this world.
My point being,
Right.
I can go verse by verse. Let's start. In the beginning, the Lord created.
So we addressed that. I want to get to the next part, and this is where there's going to be a little bit of controversy involved. So they're going to start talking about the nature of sin and morality and the Jewish stance on that, and then they're going to talk about abortion and the Jewish stance on that. And I'm going to address some I'm not going to make the claim that he's purposely being deceptive, but the way it comes out is deceptive.
Viral interview online where, I don't know if you're familiar with Dennis Prager.
I am.
He seems so proud to know Dennis Prager until he hears the topic of conversation.
He grew up Jewish. I don't know if he still practices, but he got in a big debate with Matt Fradd, who's a Catholic. And the debate was whether over pornography is inherently sinful or if it's fine in certain instances. For example, let's say a man is tempted to cheat on his wife. Well, he can just watch pornography. And Dennis said it would be acceptable if it mitigates those, evil consequences of adultery. But Matt was like, no, that's not allowed ever because it's intrinsically evil. And I think the biggest distinction there is highlighted in our New Testament when Jesus says, he challenges the Jews at the time and says, not only do you commit adultery when you actually do the action, but when you look at a woman, you commit adultery, you commit lust in your heart. So that's sort of the highlight of the intrinsic evils of an action versus the consequences. Is there any sort of distinction there? I guess my broader question is, what is the Jewish definition of sin or disorder?
So sin is defined by that which God said is unacceptable. That's the definition. When it comes in your specific example of looking at pornography, then it's very clear that Judaism says that's unacceptable.
So he is an Orthodox rabbi, and it seems that he's more on the Orthodox, like the more Orthodox end of the Orthodox spectrum. But he's ignoring here that the bulk of Orthodox Jews fall into the modern Orthodox world. Many Jews are not Orthodox at all, but of the ones that are, there's a lot of modern Orthodox Jews that are much more like Dennis Prager. They don't think that there's anything wrong with it unless you're doing something worse than that, even though it's a despicable thing in and of itself. He's giving a good stance here. It's not permissible. It's bad. It's sinful. That's his stance, and it's a good stance to take. However, he is not being honest here because he's not telling the guy interviewing him that massive amounts of the modern Orthodox world would not have as much of an issue with it as he does. Not only that, even within his standpoint, even within his view, he might say it's unacceptable, but there are different levels of unacceptable. And the reality is that we can it's not an official stance, but a lot of Jewish life is communal. It's part of going to shul, to the synagogue, part of being in Jewish community, participating in Jewish things. A lot of how you can judge how seriously the religious Jewish community takes things is how excluded you are for committing certain sinful acts. For example, if somebody is constantly violating the Sabbath or not keeping kosher to an Orthodox Jewish standard, they would not be allowed to serve as a mashgiach. How do I say mashgiach? Somebody watching food to make sure it's kosher in its production. This here. Okay, we'll address that afterwards. But so you would be excluded to an extent from the community. Some things you might do might stop you from getting called up to the Torah to read or to say the blessing on the Sabbath or during the week, whatever it is. If somebody is open about the fact that they watch pornography, they're not going to be met. Obviously, if they're talking about it all the time, they're going to be looked at as a weirdo, but they're not going to be met with the same scrutiny and distancing as somebody who violates the Sabbath or who doesn't keep kosher, for example. So he's saying, yeah, it's unacceptable, but how unacceptable in his own community? And then how is that treated by the community? How is that treated, and how are people addressed who have an issue with it, let's say? And then in the rest of the Orthodox world, the whole bulk of the modern Orthodox world, maybe it's not seen as that bad at all. Maybe Dennis Prager's view is actually pretty prevalent, and it is. So he's giving a good stance on it. He's saying the truth about how it's unacceptable, but he's also leaving out the fact that huge amounts of the Orthodox Jewish world, in the modern Orthodox community, doesn't necessarily see it as bad as he does. And so he's giving a sugar-coated view of this to the guy interviewing him instead of being honest and saying, hey, there's a problem here, and unfortunately it's not being addressed properly. This is my stance. This is the biblical stance. And unfortunately, there are people that don't hold this view in the masses in the Jewish community.
It's an unacceptable thing to do. And the idea of saying, well, maybe if it's going to preserve a marriage, then it could be permissible. The reason that wouldn't work is because we have 613 commandments that we maintain God communicated to Moses and the Jewish people. Interestingly, one of them is the commandment to get divorced. Now, what does that mean? That doesn't mean that every person is commanded to divorce his wife, okay? But if a divorce is required, so there's a way that you have to do it. And that's how you fulfill the commandment, by doing it accordingly. So divorce is very sad, but there would be no justification to violate an objective wrong. You refer to it as intrinsically wrong, fine, for some noble cause.
He's saying that you don't do something bad because it'll stop you from doing something worse. You just don't do the bad thing, and that is the official stance. Unfortunately, this is going to lead into the question of abortion, and we are going to have another problem to deal with.
Except with the following. If I need to violate a Jewish precept to save a life, that would trump other Jewish values, the preservation of life. But I'm not sure that I can think of any other example, but I will share with you that, on our Sabbath.
So he's saying you don't violate, he's like, it doesn't become acceptable just because it will stop you from violating some other rule, which is a good stance to take. Again, he's not being honest about the fact that masses within the Jewish community do not hold the stringent stance that he holds with. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here because I do want to address this life for a life thing, and how he's being a little bit dishonest about how acceptable abortion has become within the Jewish world. Is that a fair critique? It's the official teaching is something, but some people just ignore it. That is on an individual, not on the ideology. So the problem is that he is one rabbi of many, and he's going to contradict himself later in the video. I'm not sure we're going to get to it, but the problem is that the top authorities in the Jewish world have given license to more local community rabbis to make decisions on these things. And he might hold the more biblical stance, in my opinion, but it's not necessarily the official teaching. Meaning the official teaching is whatever is allowed at minimum to the masses of various modern Orthodox rabbis out there. So the official teaching is technically the more lenient view, which contradicts him. That's the official teaching in the Jewish world, which is that there is really no teaching. There's a basic minimum standard, and then rabbis throughout communities can make decisions about that, and then the community can do what that rabbi says. And unfortunately, it's mostly the modern Orthodox Jewish world doing what they will with it. Yeah, I'm going to get to this. The situation in Israel per capita of abortions is horrifying. It's not worse than the Holocaust, I don't think.
Assuming, coming from my point of view, that those activities violate God's will, then that, from a Jewish perspective, would be evil, and hence we would do that evil because it would be to save a life.
Would it be fair to say that the ends justify the means?
If the topic is saving life.
I see. Okay. So life or death, grave matters.
Except when it comes to babies in the womb.
But there
a
is
nuance
one
to this,
there
yeah.
is one caveat. If I'm told to kill that person, or I will be killed, then I can't kill another person.
So this is really important. He's saying you don't violate to save life. And the caveat is that he's not allowed to kill somebody else to save his own life. He's not, that then violates in reverse. Now, in the topic of abortion that he's going to get into, obviously, when it comes to life of the mother or life of the baby, he explains very well why there would be some circumstances, whether I agree with that or not. But he does a good job of explaining that. But then he's going to miss something really serious here, and we're going to have to address it.
To save my life.
Okay.
You can't take another life to preserve your own.
I see. Got it. Okay. I mean, here's a hot topic question. There's a big debate about abortion. Let's say the woman's life is at stake. Would you say that aborting that child, let's say it's 6 months, 6-month pregnancy, what would be the Orthodox Jewish stance there?
So, if indeed a fetus is endangering the mother's life, we differentiate between the quality and reality of the mother's life, which is considered a full-fledged life, versus the potential reality of life for the fetus.
So something important is he's saying the fetus, the baby, being a more potential life does not trump the life of the mother that is a more tangible reality. But in many of these cases, you also don't know for sure that the mother's life is in danger. It's speculation. So you're going to definitely kill somebody, speculating that not killing them might affect the life of the other person. That's not all cases, obviously, but that is many of the life of the mother cases are speculation as to the amount of danger. So his argument kind of falls through here. Again, we're getting into a topic of other stuff here, but he's talking from a biblical standpoint. He's addressing this as an Orthodox rabbi, and he's going to make an even bigger blunder here.
And full-fledged life would trump the potential life, and we would do an abortion.
I see. Got it. Okay. So just a brief, history lesson that I want you to give to me. So my understanding of...
So we're going to get into current state of Judaism. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. What the rabbi left out, he's taking obviously not the most strict stance on pro-life, but a fairly stringent stance on it when it's acceptable to do abortions. He's leaving out the fact that again, bulk of the modern Orthodox Jewish community, which outnumbers the more ultra-Orthodox by who knows how much, are very, 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 very pro-abortion. Many people in the modern Orthodox Jewish world are not only, pro-choice, let's call it, they're really activists for abortion. So he's ignoring the fact that while he might have a strict stance, unfortunately, it has become incredibly popular to be pro-abortion for any reason in the modern Orthodox Jewish community. It's really dishonest that he's leaving that out, especially considering that in Israel, where you need to have permission of the Rabbanut, of the religious authority in Israel, actually has huge rates of abortion, and it's justified for things like out of wedlock pregnancy. So they'll allow for an abortion, mental health issues, whatever else it is. Massive rates per capita of abortion, outnumbering, I think, countries like France, like very liberal countries, and Israel outnumbers them per capita in abortions, become incredibly popular in the modern Orthodox Jewish community to be pro-choice activists. Really horrific, to a really horrific degree, like almost gleeful about the topic. And he's leaving that out. And this bothered me a lot because he knows better. Like, he knows what the stance in the Jewish community is like today, even in ultra-Orthodox communities being very pro-abortion. And he's leaving that out here. He's giving his official rabbinic stance where he stands on it, and he's leaving out that massive amounts of the Jewish community are totally fine with it. I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit. Not trying to get into politics here with this one. So let's see. Okay. Oh, I made a note here. This is going to be funny. Let's go, and then we'll skip ahead even more, but I wanted to.
And the Sanhedrin was still alive and well at that time, and the Jewish people followed that direction. Now, while this was happening in the land of Israel, there was a thriving Orthodox community in Babylonia. The Babylonian Jewish community begins after the destruction of the first temple, which is 586 or 432, depending on arguments and chronology. In any case, though, it begins then, and it continues all the way till roughly 1948.
What happened in 1948?
And the Babylonian community...
Why did they all leave?
...was highly developed, and it was a community that was led by religious authorities.
And being tongue-in-cheek, they were forcibly removed from their homes.
Matter of fact, there was also a concept called the exilarch. The exilarch was a representative of the Davidic family.
I am a descendant of one of the famous exilarch of Babylon. Okay, I'm going to fast forward here a little bit. I just wanted to get my little shout out there.
It was a political position, and therefore,
and then we're going to get into
Jewry
Jesus and the Talmud.
On the one hand,
everyone's favorite
by
discussion, unfortunately.
Son of Jesse, who ultimately is from David.
I see. So do you believe the current state of Israel has some sort of at least special protection or favor in the eyes of God?
I believe that the current state of Israel has experienced an enormous amount of divine providence currently. And I think it expresses itself in many different areas. As you know, we have this concept that the Jews are meant to be a light unto the nations, beginning of Isaiah. And if we take a look, Israel today is a numerically insignificant country. We don't have a lot.
But an interesting thing to miss is that who spread knowledge of the God of Israel to the rest of the world?
The people there, okay?
One of the top GDP.
But on the other hand, how do we explain its disproportionate impact on the world?
Yes.
Israel's only been around now for 70 some odd years. Many other countries haven't fought wars within that 70 some odd years, and they're not producing what Israel's producing.
Technology advancements.
The degree to which Israel is impacting the world in agriculture, in medicine, in almost every consequential field is disproportionate. So are we really that lucky? We just keep on rolling sevens? Now that doesn't mean we don't lose here and there, but in
the success of the state of Israel being chalked up to divine providence, obviously God has a hand in everything, but to specifically say that this is an indicator that God favors the current state of Israel, and again, I'm very pro-Israel. I might even hazard to call myself a Zionist, even though I know the difference between terminologies and all that. But the idea that Israel's success is a proof that God is supporting the modern Jewish version of the law, this is a problematic claim to make to an extreme. The reason being, first of all, then you'd have to assume that the Holocaust was totally justified, that it was a punishment from God because the Jewish people deserved it in some way. If you're going to make the claim that Israel has a success because they deserve it somehow, and they're worshiping God properly and deserve God's hand in it, then you'd also have to do that for the negative, for things like all the pogroms that happened. You'd have to do that for all the abuses that the Jewish people have suffered. You'd have to do that for the Holocaust. So it's a really problematic claim, and it completely diminishes the hard work and perseverance of the Jewish people in the trials that they've gone through. Um, the building of the state of Israel, the tremendous work put into that. Again, I have my issues with certain early Zionist, let's say socialist ideologies. That's not what the state of Israel is today. And Israel was built on hard work and perseverance and genius and all kinds of things like that. So to diminish that while also insinuating that that the Jewish people might have deserved every bad thing that happened to them is a really problematic comment to make, and I disagree with this 100%. Let's see, what is this here? Interesting, you made that comment. I found last week Texas, there were 240 mosques and 90 Jerusalem pro-Israel conference had to be canceled due to jihadists mandating it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to fast forward here. We're going to start getting to Jesus in the Talmud, everyone's favorite discussion. I want to point out here, I'm going to be debunking this rabbi's claim that the Jesus mentioned in the Talmud is not the Jesus of Christianity, that the Talmud is not making fun of Christians or of Jesus. He's lying. This is a blatant lie. I would not have expected this from as many people as it comes out of today. It's a fringe view. You could easily just say, yeah, certain rabbis in the Talmud said horrible things about Christians and about Jesus. That's not the view of the Jewish people. It's not binding on the Jewish people. It's one guy's opinion, okay, from the 4th century. So you could easily dismiss it as, why are you demonizing Jews over this? Because a rabbi in the 4th century said it. The problem is he's going to try to pretend that these passages are not about Jesus. And he's going to say, well, they got the timeline wrong. It's different Jesuses at different times, and it's different names, and it's different mothers. And it's very blatantly obvious that it's a polemical attack on Christianity. He'll even go as far as to say, when it says Jesus, the son of Miriam, of Mary, that it's a different Jesus, because Mary in the New Testament isn't a hairdresser, and she's called a hairdresser. And so the rabbi got it wrong 3 centuries later about what Mary's profession was, or made up a profession for her. That doesn't mean they're not talking about Jesus. The rabbis of the Talmud were not super familiar with Christianity. They didn't know everything about Christianity. They're making up timelines and they're putting Jesus in the wrong centuries, but that doesn't mean that they're not talking about Jesus. So let's play this, and yeah, we'll address it.
Scheme of the big picture, I find it very challenging to attribute our success.
Sorry, let's find it. 33. Like, he's going to cite Onkelos, raising somebody from the dead named Jesus, and that person is boiling in excrement in the afterlife. And he's like, well, it's not talking about that Jesus. The legend is that Onkelos is raising somebody from the dead to ask them if their religion is true. Who else would they be making this mythology about? Named Jesus.
To, our brilliant skill, Jeremiah, Isaiah. We have a long list of things. And that list can...
By the way, I'm not addressing any of the did Jesus fulfill prophecy, any of that stuff in this video. I think have been done ad nauseum, and I'll get to it eventually in other videos, but not the purpose of this.
Consists of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. That list consists of bringing all the Jewish people to the land of Israel. It has a concept of universal peace, that the entire planet, all humanity.
I'm just going to pause for a second. I've had 265 viewers come in so far and only 48 likes. So if you could all start hitting the like button, get things moving there.
Will come and recognize the one true God. And clearly, unfortunately, none of that has ever yet happened. So because we have this checklist that was not fulfilled, then we have no reason to assume that Jesus...
Okay, I'm going to have to address this just a little bit. The modern Jewish view on it, and it's a later Jewish view, actually, somewhat from the Talmud, extrapolated on later on, but the idea that there's 2 messiahs, because there are things that cannot be fulfilled together in these prophecies. So Judaism today divides it into 2 messiahs, simply because they can't reconcile the idea that these would all be fulfilled by one person. But they are all messianic prophecies, and they cannot all be done at the same time.
Jesus was the Messiah we were waiting for.
I see. So going into the prophets, many Christians cite Isaiah 53, which talks about a man who is average looking, he is killed for the sins of many, and that he lives a very miserable life. And many Christians read this, and they were like, this is clearly a prophecy of Jesus. So what would your response to that
So I would suggest that the people read the whole book of Isaiah, especially chapter 52, misreading of what it says. There's a letter in Hebrew, which is a mem. A mem can be understood, it's pronounced either for. It never has meant for individual, or that individual, this chapter referring to an individual, or that individual has died for something, is just an incorrect reading. And it's also borne out 2 verses or so later. There's a language that clearly indicates that it's speaking about a multiplicity, meaning that the term of the person, the suffering servant, is not an individual, is because the plural is used subsequently to talk about them, not him.
I see. Okay, makes sense. So next question, I would say this is probably one of the biggest points of contention between Christians and Jews online.
It is, this Jesus in the Talmud stuff, and it needs to be answered better.
I see it tons of times reposted. It's created a firestorm on Twitter, and it specifically refers to a sort of cryptic verse in the Babylonian Talmud that talks about this vision of this Jewish man has of a man named Jesus who is in hell, who's pretty...
I always laugh when it's like, it's not verses in the Talmud like that. It's not like technically there's no verses in the Torah either in that way, but it's not really verses. It's like passages of conversations.
Gnarly scene, boiling in excrement. What are your thoughts on that?
So, number one, we need to know that in the Talmud, there are multiple individuals with similar names. There are 15 Hillels.
There's multiple individuals cited as Jesus in the Talmud, all being called a heretic with a different religion, and they're cursing him in all these different ways. And it happens to be at different times in history, but it's all named Jesus, and it's always referred to as a heretic, and he's always met with some horrible end. Not talking about Jesus at all.
61 Elazars. And Josephus, I believe, counts 21 Jesuses. And therefore, the idea that that particular narrative is referring to the Christian Savior is not very compelling. But putting that aside, when it comes to...
It's incredibly compelling. I could be mistaken on some of the details. It's been a long time since I read it, but the passage, I believe, is referring to Onkelos deciding which religion to convert to, and he raises Jesus from the dead to ask him about it. It's obviously talking about the Jesus of Christianity, and it's a myth that is created in the Talmud as a polemic against Christianity. There are so many other ways that you could defend Judaism in an honest way without lying about what the Talmud is saying about Christians and Jesus.
The Talmud. And
it's like there are passages, he's killed on Passover Eve. Oh, but the New Testament says it's Passover, not Passover Eve, so it's a different person. Oh, his students were also killed and martyred for it. Oh, but it's not the same Jesus. It's different students of a different rabbi. Sure.
Mentioning of Jesus, then the typical...
About this, yes, not through the whole interview.
Sources that are brought are sources that have there are 2 primary sources that are brought. And both of those sources, meaning they might appear in a few different contexts, but one is talking about a Jesus who was a student of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia. And that individual, that period of time is roughly 100 years before the story of the Christian Savior. And it is true that he was named was Yeshu, and he was executed. He was executed on Passover Eve.
Oh, it's a Jesus named Jesus who's executed on Passover Eve. But it's They're telling the story of a guy 100 years before Jesus. So how could it be about Jesus? Because that rabbi who sang the story in the 3rd century doesn't know the timeline very well, and he's just making up whatever works for his story at the time. It's a recorded, written down conversation, that rabbi telling his narrative to somebody. The fact that he got the timeline wrong, right. So I want to be very clear here. This could be the official way that he was taught about this, and he does not have the intent here to lie. That is scarier than if just he's lying. I don't hear this take often. Most Jews accept that those passages in the Talmud are about Jesus, and they go, well, that's not very cool that they did that. This rabbi is defending them as about a different Jesus, which is equally bad, even if it was about a different group's rabbi, teacher, or whatever it is, to have these kinds of opinions. But it's obviously about Jesus. But I don't know if he's lying. I think he is, because this is not a very popular stance, or this is how he was taught about it and taught how to answer this.
And that all happened 100 years or so before. Now there's another individual who, his name...
Well, this is a very good point, because by doing this, you get to brush off the responsibility instead of addressing it and having a good answer for it. But you also get to deny that Jesus ever lived. Well, it wasn't even talking about that Jesus in the Talmud. So how do we know that? Even because the Talmud doesn't validate that Jesus lived, right? Because usually it's like, well, the Talmud accepts anyone that says that Jesus didn't live or that is a mythological figure. Well, even the Christian polemics against Christian stuff in the Talmud, not that that's what the Talmud is about, but the stuff that does exist there, why would they validate the existence of Jesus instead of denying that he exists at all? Which is what this rabbi and people like Tuvia Singer, for example, do now. It's not a mainstream view, but it is very convenient for them.
Is Papas Ben Yehuda, and he is the stepfather of a person referred to as Stada. Now we know who Papas Ben Yehuda is because he was a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva, who was involved in the rebellion against Hadrian in 133 of the Common Era.
So the oral law is supposedly binding, but the oral law has so many different opinions, which is one of the reasons why you know that it's not authentic going back to Moses, is because it would be one tradition, not a bunch of rabbis debating in a Greek style dialogue about what the law is supposed to be. The Talmud very often, more often than not, does not actually come to a conclusion. It approaches different topics. It has back and forth. Maybe it's like this, maybe it's like that, and then rarely is there a full conclusion giving. It's later rabbis that then interpret that and make laws based on it. It's a progressive system throughout Jewish history and culture, but no, something being in the Talmud is not inherently binding. There's a lot of mythology in the Talmud, and everyone knows it's mythology. People will say stupid things like that they believe that it's actually true, like hyenas turning into bats, for example. But obviously, most Jews do not believe that that is true. It's some random comment by some random rabbi in the Talmud. Some people actually think that there's a culture of sarcasm in the Talmud between those rabbis, and sometimes when one of them asks a question that the other thinks is stupid, they give some sarcastic answer that seems ridiculous because it is, and it's intended to be that way. But that's somebody's opinion.
And therefore, for this Stada, who's the stepson of that person, he lived afterwards. So seemingly what has happened is that whoever chose to do this, they chose to seek out sources that possibly, if you don't know enough of who's who, could sound like it refers to Jesus. But they really have nothing to do with that. As a matter of fact,
again, the fact that the rabbi in the 3rd or 4th century tells the story about a guy 100 years after Jesus doesn't mean that he's not talking about Jesus. It just means he gets the timeline wrong.
Curious to ask you one question. Are you familiar with a priest, John P. Meyer?
I don't know who the priest is that he's going to be quoting, but this is a ridiculous comment, and I'll explain why.
In his book, A Marginal Jew?
Catholic priest?
Yeah.
No.
So you should Google him. He passed away in 22.
Sure.
And he has a book called Marginal Jew. And he is one of the primary authorities on.
Yeah, the Talmud debate structure is a way of processing all the possible approaches and opinions, no matter how ridiculous they might be. You're not supposed to take it as a binding thing to believe.
Early history in Jesus. And he writes the following.
The quote he's going to say from this priest is that Jews were so occupied with other things, they weren't doing anything in response to Christianity. And so the idea that they're writing about Jesus is not true. This is a ridiculous claim, and I'll get to why.
He writes that in the earliest rabbinic sources, there is no clear or even probable reference to Jesus of Nazareth. He goes on.
No, Jesus, the son of Mary, who was killed on Passover. There's no reference to Jesus. Cool.
To write.
Cool story.
Jewish literature of the early Christian period offers no independent source for inquiry into the historical Jesus. Indeed,
there's whole passages in the Talmud on business practices and how to engage in business practices with Christians. Not what the anti-Semites say. The Talmud teaches you how to deceive Christians. That's not true. They're talking about whether or not you're allowed to buy and sell from them around certain holidays because they engage in what the Jewish people at the time thought as pagan practices. It's not about deception. It's about, are you allowed to use those things for ritually pure purposes? But there's clear interaction between Jews and Christians at the time that has to be mentioned in debates and legal discussions for the Jewish people at the time. So to say that there's no reason why they're addressing Christianity or addressing Jesus, this is again, I'm going to stick to, as best as I can say it, a mentally deficient take on this.
Why should it? Engaged in a fierce struggle for its own survival and definition, early rabbinic Judaism had other matters on its mind. And therefore, I don't see the sources that you've mentioned.
They had other things on their mind, so why would they be engaging in this? Okay, so let's explain why then there are passages in the Talmud talking about how to interact with Christians in terms of business practices. And let's address, if you're saying that Judaism didn't change anything or make anything up in response to Christianity or in response to Jesus, why then did they add a blessing? This is one of the oldest prayer services in Rabbinic Judaism. The Amidah prayer goes back supposedly all the way to the men of the Great Assembly, as he mentioned earlier. This is supposed to be a fixed prayer in Jewish culture. Why then did they add a prayer against heretics to that service? They added it to distance from the Christians who were still participating in Jewish culture and Jewish life. There was people that were believers in Jesus who were participating with the rest of the Jewish world still, even centuries later. And so they make this blessing added that's cursing heretics. And so obviously Christians didn't think they were heretics, so that wouldn't actually distance them. But ones that maybe they were superstitious, thought it would curse them, it would distance them. And so the idea that Judaism didn't respond in any way to Christianity, they had other things on their mind. Well, Christianity was one of the things on their mind. This growing other Jewish religion that they were very much opposed to was part of that struggle. And they did many things in response to early Christianity. So to say that the Talmud isn't talking about Jesus, because why would the Jews be concerned with concern themselves with Jesus at that time? Again, this is, developmentally delayed take on it. Exactly. Daniel Ward. No, unfortunately, had a lot going on, and it's have I got through it yet? No, I just started reading it. It's going to take me a very long time to get through it, especially with that study Bible. Have they gone over rejecting the Deuterocanon? We talked a little bit about the canon of Scripture at the beginning when he says it was fixed at the time of the Great Assembly. It's obviously not. There was books of the Deuterocanon mentioned in later Jewish texts, so obviously there was differing opinions on what was valid Scripture and what wasn't. So yeah, a lot of dishonesty there. But again, I don't think Jews today are being dishonest about it. I think this is official stances that were implemented and are part of mainstream Judaism. In some ways, I don't think this rabbi knows better. I don't think he's being dishonest.
mentioned to really be referring to Jesus of Christianity.
I see. So it seems like there's two different candidates, and in both of them, the timeline just doesn't match up. You can't even stretch it.
Correct.
I see.
So
And
it
that
really doesn't work.
I see. And that sort of answers my second question. Of many Christians online, they cite other verses in the Talmud that talk about, a person named Jesus the Nazarene crucified on Passover Eve. And they mentioned that his mother, Mary, was an adulterer, cheated on her husband. But it seems like I would imagine this is the exact same case. Or it's
Correct.
referring to the
In
same
all these
person.
cases, everything that's being quoted are accurate Talmudic quotes. The attribution.
That prayer is part of the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei prayer. It's the culmination of the prayer service in most prayers.
To Jesus. I mean, first of all, the idea of her name was Miriam, the person that you're mentioning.
Yes.
And she indeed, according to the Talmud, that's the second person who we're talking about. And her name has nothing to do, the name in the Hebrew or the Aramaic is Miriam Megadla Se'ar, which is Miriam the hairdresser. To the best of my knowledge, no one ever associated hairdressing with Mary. That wasn't one of her fortes. Another interesting thing, by the way, is that in both.
So he's saying that this legend refers to Jesus, the son of Mary, which is obviously talking about Jesus, because they're referring to somebody who is heretical that they dislike. And they're saying him and his mother's name, but because they called her a hairdresser, it must be talking about a different Jesus. This rabbi, 300 years later, who doesn't know anything about it, happens to call her a hairdresser. That must mean it's a different Jesus. This is just, it's absurd. It's just completely absurd.
Talmudic text, it talks about executing the person on Passover Eve. That's not what the Christian text says. Christian text.
So I want to address this here. So growing up in the Orthodox Jewish community, we just kind of learn things as you go through that education system. Trying to learn about Judaism or about the Torah, I wouldn't know necessarily. There's probably other people that have spoken about this online. I don't necessarily have a good source. I would just, if you want to learn about Jewish takes on the Torah, I would just, pick up a English translated Hebrew Bible with Rashi. Rashi, don't trust what Rashi says. Just read Rashi to understand where a lot of the Jewish take comes from. But that's how you'd kind of get an idea of the Jewish way of learning the Torah. I think I heard Tuvia Singer bring up Mary laid with a Roman soldier. Yeah. I don't know if that's explicitly in the Talmud or if that's a Tuvia Singerism. But either way, yeah, the idea that they're making fun of this woman, calling her an adulteress who had a baby, and they're trying to pretend, and her name's Miriam and her son's Jesus, and he's a heretic. Like, the rabbis are obviously talking about Jesus there. It's incredibly dishonest to say otherwise. You should just address it. The rabbis in the Talmud had polemical reasons to attack Christians and Christianity at the time. Okay? We don't believe that. We think that they're making up a lot of stuff, just like we believe that they made up where if you can, although some people believe this, but if you take the ashes of a burnt dead cat and rub it on your eyes and then open your eyes, you'll see demons around you. So you'll be able to see the demons. I mean, that's in the Talmud also. It's Babylonian superstition, but we don't believe in that as Jews today, that that's actually something that happens or that's real. So why do we believe in the story? We wouldn't believe in the stories about Jesus boiling an excrement either. These are mythological stories said by Babylonian rabbis in the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. That's the easiest way to dismiss this. Yeah, rabbis in the Talmud said crazy things. It's not binding on us. We don't have to believe it. That's the way that you dismiss the anti-Semitic attacks against Jews because of the Talmud, the evil Talmud, which is not. We're talking about all the passages talking about Jesus in the Talmud might make up like one page out of thousands and thousands of pages in the Talmud. Like, this is a very small part of the Talmud. Like, the largest tractate is talking about like rules of blessings and things like that, and where you can eat food and all kinds of stuff. Like, the idea that the Talmud is an attack on Christianity is absurd also. But rabbis could just say that. They could be like, yeah, the Talmud's not about Christianity. I don't know why you're attacking us because there's some random passages that some rabbi said something about Jesus. This is an easy way to dismiss that attack. You don't have to lie about what it's saying. What's going on here? What is going on here, guys? Anyways, let's keep playing this.
Says it was on Passover. It also says Jerusalem.
So they got the city wrong of the crucifixion, and they got whether it was Passover, not Passover Eve. So that means it's a different Jesus.
And the Christian text. The Jewish text is happening, the second one is happening in the city of Lod. The first one is happening in Jerusalem. And one of the reasons for the difference for where it's happening is in the first period, there were X amount of cults that were being challenging, and therefore there was an agenda to demonstrate to the masses that these cults were not acceptable, whereas that wasn't the case later on. And in both cases, we're talking about a Jewish court executing by stoning, which is not how factually the Christian Jesus was put to death. So what, in my opinion, is happening here is people are looking at something because they want to find something.
No, they're looking at it because it's there.
But the legitimacy of these claims.
So just to summarize this section, again, you could easily dismiss the anti-Semitic claims that Jews are bad because of the Talmud, that, Jews don't believe everything that is said in the Talmud is fact. Jews don't believe that anything said in the Talmud is binding. Even the legal system of Judaism doesn't necessarily, is not derivative of the Talmud. It's later Jewish texts that then explain that and how to do the specific rules. Just because somebody in the Talmud said something wacky does not mean that it's binding and that you can attack Jews over it. Now, there are some things today that I find problematic in Jewish culture that are binding because it's explicitly written as the binding rule, but that's a whole other topic for a different conversation. I want to go here. There's two more sections that I want to get to about the authority of rabbis and just a little bit of a problem in that, how Orthodox Jews see the authority of rabbis. And then about whether or not God could be man and his take on that, and explain why his stance is not even really a Jewish stance.
Is not on very firm ground.
I see. Thank you for that clarification. So who would you say Jesus?
Yeah. I mean, most Orthodox Jews do learn the Talmud to an extent. You don't read it like scripture. You're learning about debates that took place in the conversations. So it's not like, oh, I read the Talmud and then I believe this thing. It's not like that. But yeah, most Orthodox Jews do learn Talmud to, like the Gemara, to an extent. There's like Daf Yomi where you learn one page of it a day, and it takes you, X number of time to, depending if you do one page or 2 pages or whatever it is. But no, most Jews are not super learned on the Talmud. Like, it's not the main part of Jewish life. Yeah. I don't blame all Jews for anything, even if a couple of Jews did bad things 1,600 years ago. Yeah, I mean, I've said this in another video, to demonize Jewish people because of a passage in the Talmud is like demonizing all British people because a litigator or a legislator, in England in the 1800s made some comment in a litigation. I keep saying litigation. In a legislative debate, made some comment about a certain group of people, and therefore all British people are bad because that's recorded in British court documents. Essentially, that's what it would be like to demonize Jews over something said in the Talmud.
Of Nazareth, the historical man that.
Yeah, I get accused of being a self-hating Jew and an anti-Semite because I critique Jewish theology. And people are like, you don't even know any Jewish people. It's like my friends and family are all Jewish, basically. I grew up as an Orthodox Jew. I don't know anyone else. It's just a ridiculous claim, but you can, if you can't beat the argument, I guess attack the person. Oh, that wasn't directed at me. That's good. I thought you were being joking there.
Christians point to as our God. Who do you think that he was in history, if not God? I've heard different takes. I hear.
So I'm going to fast forward here to where he talks about the authority of the rabbis in today's day and age and how that works.
So it's not.
By the way, overall, he does a pretty good job of explaining the Jewish stance on things. The Orthodox, more ultra-Orthodox leaning stance on things. I don't think it was a bad conversation or interview by any stretch. I have problems with a few points where he seems very dishonest.
Not so cut and dry. In Judaism, there are different levels of rabbi. We can sort of compare it to baseball. You have single A, double A, triple A, and then you have the major leagues, you have a platoon player, you have an all-star, and you have a superstar. So we have 6 levels. Okay? Now, typically in the mainstream,
I mean, in part, Jesus and Paul are both referring to an extent to the Pharisee traditions, which have been around at that point for several hundred years. But in general, I think they're talking about the law, the ritualistic laws, even specifically from the Torah.
a individual who is going to become a rabbi and have other people recognize their status will go to a series of schools and education and pass tests within an institution, and the institution typically will grant that person a title. But just because you got a title doesn't mean people are going to value your opinion. Here we get to the single, double, triple A, and the majors. What do I mean? The way that you become an authority in Judaism is typically by...
He's about to say the official stance, but there are many popular rabbis who are authorities because they have big followings on YouTube, which is incredibly problematic when you look at people like Tuvia Singer, who is perfectly willing to throw Judaism under the bus to attack Christianity when convenient. People like Manis Friedman, who are essentially heretics from a standpoint of Christianity and Judaism. And these are incredibly popular online figures who have massive followings.
Demonstrating, typically in writing, your intellectual command of Judaic material, and by providing unusual qualitative dissertations.
Well, he got you wrong, didn't he? Look at that. That's why you can't say things about people without actually knowing.
On topics where people read what you have and it's like, wow, that is so amazing. So what happens is you have different levels of what I just described. And as a result of peer review, which then once a certain group of peers says, whoa, this guy, he's above us. I mean, we can't compete. Look at his command of the Talmud, of the codes.
Okay, this I'm interested to hear. Why is there no such thing as a Catholic Jew? Can you answer that before I continue? And what's your background? I'm very curious to hear the response here. Come on, how do you say it? Tenebris sint? Why is there no such thing as a Catholic Jew? You don't say. Just let him answer first. Yeah, people have their ideas about what it means, and they don't know what they're talking about. Is there a reason you won't answer what your background is and why you think that there's no such thing as a Catholic Jew? Yeah. So you're not going to answer, huh? Oh, this is great. There aren't many real Jews. What is a real Jew? Why don't you tell us all what a real Jew is? Why don't you tell us all what a real Jew is? Come. I'm waiting. Yeah, he's Googling it right now because he said something stupid and he's getting attacked by everyone for being stupid. Come on, what's your background? What are you? Tenebriscent? Is everyone finding this conversation, this discussion interesting, or should I move back onto the video and ignore the idiot? Yeah, no Catholic Jews, huh? I'm going to go back to the video until the idiot wants to respond.
And his creativity in applying them in a compelling, logical
Unless we misunderstood you, in which case, feel free to correct.
way. Typically, we don't do things based on belief as much as we do based on compelling logic. And when people can look at our material all the way back to the 5 books of Moses and demonstrate a logical process where they reach a 21st century conclusion, and once again, they lay it out for you, you can attack every part. If, as a result of your attempts to attack, you've failed, you bow to that person because they've demonstrated intellectual superiority.
Wow.
So what happens is we have gradations of this. Mm-hmm. We have our superstars, who's a very elite group of people who their grasp, and it's, by the way, not only typically of Judaic sources, they will be familiar with consequential issues in medicine, in engineering, and other areas, because there are many issues that come up that
he's talking about why
expertise,
certain rabbis are considered experts,
certain operations
held on the level that they are.
We have certain laws about you're not allowed to castrate somebody, okay? And a person has to have operations done on their reproductive system. Rabbis are called in to determine what is allowed to be done, what's not allowed to be done. But that rabbi has to have an amazing working knowledge of biology and the issues.
What he's saying here is completely true. There are a lot of rabbis who deal with medical ethics, who are very, very intelligent people with really truly amazing knowledge both of Judaic things and biology and chemistry and sciences in general. So that what he's saying here is absolutely true, that there are rabbis that specialize in that.
Involved to render a decision.
It actually is also very impressive to have that much knowledge of anything.
5 laws.
Yes.
I see.
So,
okay. So if somebody's ethnically Jewish, but is a believer and a member of the Catholic Church, how are they not a Hebrew Catholic or a Jewish Catholic?
typically, okay,
Oh, he's a Baal Tshuva. He's going to be hardcore trying to defend Judaism in the stupidest way that he can.
rabbis such as myself, okay, we are more rabbis for the masses. We're sort of intermediaries for the superstars. Intermediaries, just as we bridge the gap between these brilliant people and the masses who are not going to appreciate their brilliance because they don't have the capacity.
Simple folks like myself.
Oh, so we have to have superstar rabbis and we need intermediary ones, and we can't really understand the ones at the highest level because they're real geniuses and we can't possibly understand what they're saying. So we just kind of have to accept it as it trickles down through our local rabbi. He's going to make another comment and I'll explain why it's ridiculous.
You know, they don't have the capacity to understand the depth. Just like, look, right now, you know, Einstein, yes, he happened to be Jewish. That's not my point. The average Joe is not going to understand what Einstein's talking about.
But if Einstein, in all his genius, said hyenas turn into bats, it wouldn't matter what a great physicist he is. We'd know he's off his rocker, right? How... The fact that somebody is a genius in a specific field or understands a specific topic well does not mean that you can't possibly understand what they're talking about and they couldn't possibly explain it to your little level. This is the Jewish attitude towards the Gedolim, the leaders of the generation. Well, now you're giving yourself away because you could be a Baal Tshuva and a Levite. You could be born a Levite and have not grown up religious and gone back to Judaism and be a Baal Tshuva. You're obviously making something up here.
Yeah.
But this is, again, the attitude of the rabbinic system is the great rabbis will know and we just listen. And if our intermediary rabbi explains it to us, our local community rabbi, then we'll take his stance and we'll accept that he's passing down the knowledge properly. It's a very, it's not Gnostic. I'm not going to say it's Gnostic, but it's Gnostic style. There's a secret knowledge they're going to know. And even if it makes no sense at all, we have to trust that their opinion is important. No, there are Levite Jews. I don't know what, maybe explain that a little bit more.
But if we have somebody that you respect, see, the way it works is if there's somebody who you highly respect because you can appreciate their brilliance, and they tell you, Randall, that guy there, he makes me look like nothing. So now you're going to have respect for your mentor's mentor.
I see.
Because there's something tangible. You know why your mentor is greater than you. You know why. Right. You know his command of his material. Right. And he's telling you, and if you want, you can look at it, if you can understand it on your own.
So he's saying you need your mentor to tell you, oh, you can trust this great rabbi. Then as long as I tell you it's okay, you can trust him. And don't worry about the actual explanation. Don't worry about a legitimate explanation for why we're telling you what we're telling you. Just trust that I'm one of the Gedolim. Just trust that I know better than you.
It's not
this is basically what I wanted to say about the rabbinic system today, as far as how people just the rabbi said it. My rabbi said it. Okay. I've even seen people debating, and they're trying to debate somebody on Jewish theology or versus Christian theology, and it'll come down to and be like, well, why do you think that's like? Well, I have to ask my rabbi, I guess. I don't know why we say that. It's like, did you not think to look it up for yourself or research it in some way? I get that you're learning from your rabbi. You should trust authorities to teach you. There are traditions that go way back. You should trust those traditions to teach and continue these things, but don't just accept what somebody tells you because it's your rabbi. I want to go a little bit further now, just to the final thing that I want to address here, which is how he responds when, I want to say, is it Randall? Is the guy's name Randall, the interviewer? Iron Inquisitor? I think it's Randall. But when he asks him about could God become man, and the response given by the rabbi, and this is the funniest thing to me, because it actually, people respond to me on my videos, well, Jews don't believe that, but then he gives an answer. I'll explain in just a moment. We'll get there. 105.
Makes sense. So back to the messiahship and Jesus. So we as Christians believe that Jesus was fully human and fully God. We call this not a merge, but this two natures, one person. We call this the hypostatic union. Do you think it's even possible for God to become man?
No.
Okay. Why is that?
Contradictory to what the Bible says, but sure.
Because from a fundamental perspective in Judaism, the essence of God is something that, first of all, it's explicit in Scripture that God is likened to a consuming fire.
It's explicit in Scripture that God is likened to a consuming fire. So I don't know if he's quoting, I think it's Deuteronomy 4, where it says God is like a fire, a consuming fire. He's a jealous God. This is not an ontological statement about the nature of God being like fire or being pure energy, as he's going to explain. It's a statement about the nature of God's attitude towards things, or towards people, or towards Israel. He's a consuming fire, a jealous God. This is not ontologically describing God. So he could be referring there, or worse, he could be referring to Exodus 23, God being described as a fire on Mount Sinai, and that's the glory of God being seen as a fire. But a few passages earlier, Moses and the elders go up onto Sinai, and they see God standing there on pavement of sapphire, and they eat in front of God, and they behold God. And first it says they see, and then it says they behold, but it's very clear that they see God. So this is again a ridiculous thing to say. God is likened to a fire. So he's going to go on to say God is pure energy, and he's going to go into a whole Kabbalistic approach to it, which is very weird, because I would have thought that a rabbi from this background would be avoiding the more Kabbalistic takes on God, the Neoplatonist style Kabbalistic views on God. And I'll explain why that's pretty funny as well.
And God essentially is pure energy. It's like radioactive. And in order to have this world, I mentioned that the word for world is hidden. There is an entire system that of buffer zones between the essence of God and our universe.
There's the pure energy God, and then, which is obviously not biblical. A Christian might say God is spirit, but to say God is like this fire energy thing that cannot be comprehended in that way. And then there's a buffer zone, because God can't even create without buffers and systems and all this stuff. It's Neoplatonism, and it's then found its way into Kabbalistic Judaism in around the 13th century. A little bit earlier on, it technically starts 7th, 8th century, really culminates in the Zohar in the 13th century. I have the whole video on how that's a forgery. But essentially, these are not ideas that were mainstream in the Jewish world until these Kabbalistic ideas took root. And even then, they were not popular until much later on. In fact, today, what's funny that he's using the Kabbalistic idea to explain God, and not the more Maimonides Aristotelian idea of, well, God's just kind of an infinite being that we don't really comprehend, so we don't think about it. Even saying his names or describing him wouldn't do him justice, so we just can't kind of really think about it or comprehend it. That's the more Maimonides style. I'm obviously simplifying it here. He's going into the more Kabbalistic idea of God as energy and these buffer zones and systems, like things like the Sephirot, and he's describing a very Kabbalistic view of God. However, what's funny is when I bring up how Kabbalah has infiltrated Judaism completely, and a lot of Judaism really centers around Kabbalah, even most Jewish people today unknowingly following Kabbalistic ideas. When you say that, people go, "No, what are you talking about? We don't follow Kabbalah. We don't believe in that. It's very, it's kind of fringe. Some people learn Kabbalah. Most people don't learn Kabbalah. It's not really popular." It's like, no, it's fully integrated into Jewish thought today, to the extent that this rabbi, who's not some wacky ascetic Kabbalist learning the Zohar, is talking about God in ways that come from Kabbalah and not from earlier Jewish thought. And they have the audacity to completely warp the biblical idea of God and change it out for a Kabbalistic idea of God, and then the audacity to claim that Christians are not reading the plain meaning of the text. Mind-boggling.
And therefore, the idea that more than a G chip, that's the soul, the G chip, right? We're in Silicon Valley area. Mm-hmm. So that is something that God...
Right. So the idea that God could not take a human form, there are some earlier opinions, but really it solidifies with Maimonides. Maimonides says God is infinite, unknowable, not in the Zoharistic energy Neoplatonist way, but in a more Aristotelian, original prime mover kind of way. Maimonides is heavily influenced by Aristotelian philosophy, very popular in the Islamic world at the time. He's also heavily influenced by Islamic scholars, and he's not allowed to say certain things about the nature of God. He can be Jewish, he can contradict Islam in beliefs and practices, but he can't blaspheme God from an Islamic perspective, or they're going to... So Maimonides is heavily influenced by the Islamic world and Aristotelian philosophy. That's one thing. And then there's heavily influenced, Kabbalah is heavily influenced by Neoplatonism. And then that is what kind of this rabbi is more discussing here. But they are both contradictory to the biblical idea of God. And the Jewish polemic against Christianity will say, well, how can you anthropomorphize God? You're not allowed to do that. You can't believe that. Oh, they're all allegorical passages. Like, where do you see that they're allegorical passages? Even early rabbinic tradition doesn't see it that way. Rambam, Maimonides, says you can't anthropomorphize God. You can't say anything about God with like a human descriptor unless it's said in the Bible that way. But early Midrashim are talking about God walking around the temple with Abraham and God talking to a pre-existent Messiah long before Maimonides. So yeah, it's very odd that the Jewish world took that turn as to how they see God. I mean, that's what I grew up thinking. I mean, and that's where you get Jews who are like a lot of people around me were like more Buddhist about their ideas about God because of that, because you can't really wrap your head around it. You're ignoring the biblical idea of God for this either Maimonides or Kabbalistic idea of God or some amalgamation of the two. And a lot of Jews end up being like, well, God is just a power. It's like, well, what does that mean?
God has managed to enable to interface with a human body.
No, I'd say that a lot of what Jews do today is similar to what they did in the Second Temple period. The rabbinic system is already being created at that point earlier, but it has deviated even substantially from that. There's a lot of practices today, like if you told a rabbi from the Second Temple, like you have to, if you eat chicken, I mean, the prohibition is against cooking a goat in the milk of its mother. Then it becomes about any meat and milk, and then if you have a rabbi today saying, oh, if you eat chicken, you have to wait 6 hours before you can eat dairy, and you told that to a rabbi from the Second Temple, they'd be like, what the heck are you talking about?
But a more intense interaction with God. Did you ever see Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember the scene at the end when they open up the Ark and everybody gets vaporized?
Yes.
Okay.
Melts.
Right. So why? Besides it was great, movie. Because one of the fundamentals that they had been told is that the presence of God is something that cannot be in any way dealt with a human body.
So he's concocted a completely different view of what God is or could do based on later traditions from like the 13th century. And based on that is saying, well, God couldn't be in a human body at all because it would annihilate the human body, because God's infinite energy has to go through these buffer zones and systems. And why? Why do you believe that? Where does it say anything like that in the Bible? Nowhere. The best he had was God is likened to a fire. But one of them is not an ontological statement about God, and the other one actually describes God with a physical body in the passage immediately before.
concentrated manner. So therefore, the idea of God embodying, because the essence of God is this incredibly powerful reality, a human body can't contain God.
I see. Do you think the Old Covenant, or the Ark of the Covenant, is still around?
Yes. No idea where.
Is it in the back over there?
I can't tell you that.
Okay.
I do have a replica in my
So
office.
that's
Okay.
basically
But you actually-
what I wanted to get to in this video. So his ideas about the oral law are pretty standard for Judaism. Again, we talked about why they're not true, why you'd have to presuppose on a faith basis that the rabbis are telling you the truth about that complexity that's needed, and then why their system is needed to match that complexity. His ideas about the canon being sealed obviously were not true. His ideas about morality and sin, he has good stances on it, but he's forgetting that half of the Jewish world today, if not more, completely contradicts him. And then his ideas that Jesus in the Talmud is not talking about Jesus of Christianity is just intellectually completely dishonest. And then lastly, this idea about God not being able to take human form because he's basing his ideas on a later Kabbalistic or Rambam type tradition about the nature of God, not on earlier Jewish beliefs. So that's what I wanted to cover in this video. There were some things that it's just I disagree with him, and I wanted to point out why he's wrong, and then some things where he's being very dishonest, unless that's just what he was taught and he's repeating it. I think we're going to finish up with this for now. Does anyone in the chat have any specific questions or anything like that that you want covered? Yes, unfortunately, I can't get to all of those emails. I haven't seen a lot of them just because I'm very busy outside of this. This is something that I try to make the time for. But I will try to look for that and respond. I don't think in the way that you're thinking, though. You'd have to understand that the influence of how Kabbalah was developed and what they're actually describing. Yes, Pepe, Rambam did get it from his Muslim buddies. It was not a mainstream view in Judaism before that. Who hit you in the head with a baseball bat? Can you answer that? Like, we'll come after them for you. We'll make sure justice is carried out. Are you serious right now? You still haven't answered what your background is, what you believe. You're just kind of attacking people with stupid statements in the chat. Come on, what's your background? What do you believe? Let's address it. Maybe I'll have you come up and talk about it. Care to answer any of that? My time zone, that would be giving away way too much. My time zone, I'm on Central Time. I'll give you that much for anyone who's tuning in now. Too much. I'm giving away too much. But Central Time. I see this fellow up here does not want to answer what he believes in, just wants to say stupid things to people in the chat. And when confronted, does not want to share what he believes in, what group he's from, anything like that. So if I make a new religion today and I claim that it's descendant from one of the 12 sons of Jacob, does that make me an Israelite? And does that make anyone converting to my religion Israelites? By claim alone? Yeah, I think Sint is scared. You want to come up, Sint, and I'll put a link for you to come up and talk. You want to come up and talk and debate some stuff while all these nice people who tuned in to listen to something interesting while you're attacking them all? No kidding. Might be a keyboard warrior. Still hasn't answered anything about what he believes in, what group he's from, what community he's from. Won't answer any of the questions. You still won't answer anything. How about this, Sint? I'll give you an opportunity to say what your background is since you decided to attack everyone else in the chat. You can say what your background is, or you can come up and debate me on anything you'd like, or I can just put you in the timeout so you can't talk anymore because you're annoying people. Or maybe I'll just let you talk. What do you think? Should I time him out or wait for him to come up and offer to debate? No, Yehuda Yisrael isn't that stupid. Yehuda Yisrael has some brain cells to rub together. This guy does not. When someone says, here's what I am and what I believe in, and you say that thing doesn't exist, you're a liar. You don't think that that's an attack? If you say, I disagree with you, I have a different stance on that. But no, your thing that you're claiming you are is not a thing that exists. That's not an attack. Iron Inquisitor, are you here? Is that actually you? I've been waiting for you to come on and go over the video with me. I had to do the whole thing without you. Do you want to hop in the stream? Iron Inquisitor, can I, if I put a link for you to join in the chat and nobody else use this, I'll ban you. Okay, let me get you a link here. Copy invite link. This is my first time using this software, I think. This is not for anyone but my guest of honor here, Iron Inquisitor. That's for you to join. Oh, you're at the gym? You don't want to hop in for a minute? Oh, what a shame. I thought you were going to pop in. I thought the yes sir was to coming in on the chat. To come in on the stream, basically. Yeah, so I was going over the video. I hope you're listening. Basically, I thought that the questions were good questions, but just me coming from a Jewish background, I actually know how to push back a little bit on some of the answers that were given, and that's essentially what we were doing here. Did you get a chance to see any of the video or any of the stream, rather? Yeah, this is what everyone wants to know. Are you doing a bro split? Did he go back to lifting weights and he's not interested in the chat here? Iron Inquisitor, blink twice if you're almost done at the gym. Anyways, back to the conversation here. So I guess this what is it? Sint doesn't want to come on and debate. He wants to attack Jews and Catholics um, at the same time, right? So I'm still waiting to hear if he's going to say what his background is or why he's attacking people or why he thinks there's no such thing as a Jewish Catholic. Do I lift? Not for a very long time, unfortunately. The chat is pretty slow. I don't know YouTube streaming that well. I'm new to this. I've been making videos for a while, but this is my first time getting into streaming. I don't know how the delay is. Yeah, if you you got anything to say about it? I hear your feedback. Did you watch the stream? That's all he knows what to do. So, Iron Inquisitor, if you are still watching, first of all, my email to get in touch with me is in my channel description. I think you might be interested to hear my background and how I got into this, given that you just had a conversation with an Orthodox rabbi. I come from the same background from Orthodox Judaism, but let's call it in a very different place than the rabbi is in belief today. If you can't join now, I understand completely. Lifting weights is very important. And I mean that sincerely. I should get back to it. My kettlebells are rusted. But yeah, if you wanted to send me an email, go over maybe some of the stuff that I covered in the stream, anything like that, I'd be happy to do that. Ash's cheeks are flushed. My cheeks are always flushed. I don't know what the point is. Mr. Sint, do you not want to tell anyone what your background is or why you're attacking them or why you think that there are no such thing as Jewish Catholics? This is a tactic, a common tactic. The reason he's saying it is because he didn't actually answer. He's pretending he answered. And now, even though it's free to click the button and answer, he's not going to. So could you answer again, if you're not a coward, why you think that there's no such thing as a Jewish Catholic? And what background you're from that you have any authority or knowledge to be making claims like that about Jewish Catholics? Yeah, Sint, you can come on without turning your camera on. You've angered everyone in the chat. You've insulted people. Yeah. So, what did I think of my first church service? So, I went to church for the first time to check it out. It was a Byzantine Melkite Catholic church, and it was awesome. It was absolutely awesome. Thank you for that. Oh, you've commented before. You're the one who's a retired Green Beret and a Levite, and now you're in intelligence and defense, and you're also a physicist, right? You're also a magician, a wizard, 33rd degree Mason, if I'm not mistaken. What else on the list? Okay, I think I know who we're talking about now. Comments some stupid things all the time. Why don't you come on and chat? Are you an Orthodox Jew? Are you a Baal Tshuva, as somebody said here? Do you want to talk about your take on Jewish Catholics instead of doing it back and forth on the chat? Yeah, Joseph de Israel. If that guy is a Green Beret and a physicist, I am a peanut. Does anyone know how next time I can do less of a delay in the chat? Somehow, there's got to be a setting in YouTube, or maybe it's just the way that it works. I don't know. Does anyone else have any questions that they want to ask specifically in this chat, maybe about the stream, about Iron Inquisitor's video with the rabbi? Anything that I can address here? Well, so this is interesting here. Um, so the church that I went to is an Eastern Catholic church, and in almost every respect, they're like an Eastern Orthodox church. Um, so as far as the liturgy was the Eastern liturgy. Um, so I guess in a way that is kind of more of the experience that I had. Yeah, I had talked about that in the video that I had made about why I have not converted yet. Um, some of the things holding back are not necessarily problems anymore. I'm still considering things and working through stuff, but yeah, definitely. More on the origins of Kabbalah and how does it come from. Okay, so Kabbalah starts, I mean, it's based in earlier mysticism in a lot of ways, Second Temple period stuff. It diverts heavily around, I think, the 7th, 8th century. It starts to become very um, heavily based in Neoplatonism, which is becoming very popular. And this kind of culminates in the 13th century. Moses de Leon is a Kabbalist in Spain. He claims he finds a book called the Zohar, which he attributes to a 2nd century rabbi called named Shimon Bar Yochai. It's obviously not. It's a forgery. Like he's writing it with some contemporaries, maybe collecting some other manuscripts. It's a massive amount of volumes of books. It can't really be done by one person. So it's different contemporaries, maybe a few earlier sources all compiled together. He claims it's from Shimon Bar Yochai, but the language obviously points to it being a 12th, 13th century medieval Spanish text. It's written in Aramaic like the Talmud, but there's linguistic aspects that show it to be a from the time period then, not from earlier, that he claims. The ideas are wacky. Like they're not based in the Bible at all. He claims they are. Like things are pointing to verses in the Bible, but changing letters around, changing words, talking about different divine concepts that are found nowhere in the Bible. I've even heard somebody talking about the Zohar and explaining it and talking about the complex multiplicity within God's nature. You wouldn't expect to hear that from an Orthodox Jew, right? Um, and so, yeah, so Kabbalah really takes hold then with the Zohar as like the most popular book. It's funny. Um, there's only one book that's called Kadosh really in Judaism, holy, and that's the Torah, um, except for the Zohar. So the Talmud is not called the Holy Talmud, but the Zohar is called the Zohar Kadosh, which is the Holy Talmud, the Holy Zohar. So it's really weird. It gets this really special status. It's the deep secrets of Judaism, obviously not anything to do with the Bible. It's actually considered a heresy for a long time by different rabbinic communities. Eventually becomes more and more popular, and by popular vote is basically becomes mainstream in Judaism. Um, then you have the big problem with Shabtai Tzvi, who's a false messiah, who's referencing the Zohar for a lot of the crazy things he's doing. Really, really puts a long-lasting wound on the Jewish people, deceiving about a third of the Jewish world at the time, and only really becomes more popular again in kind of the modern sense in Hasidic Judaism, where it's kind of tamed and put more in context of personal relationship with God. Um, so that's kind of a brief rundown of it. So yeah, we got there, spoke to some people. They started the liturgy. We were there for that. The priest there spoke. I think it's called a homily. Was there for the liturgy. Spoke to the people there afterwards. It was a really good experience. I don't know what more to say about it. Is there anything particular that you wanted to know about? Yeah, the Zohar is a Jewish mystical text, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's authentic in its relationship with the Bible, for example, or that it's based in biblical Judaism. It's part of Jewish culture now and heritage, but it's not. It's not based in biblical concepts. It claims to be. It points to biblical verses and stuff like that, but it doesn't line up. Did I feel moved in any way? Yes, absolutely. Again, I'm going to be very careful and not say that I necessarily feel that there was a spiritual component to feeling moved there, because it is a beautiful liturgy and service. Um, so I want to be very careful with how I approach that. But absolutely. Yeah, I don't understand this. You could easily dismiss the anti-Semitic attacks based about things in the Talmud, which with a much more clear, concise answer. Hey, the Talmud is a compiled document of thousands of conversations between hundreds, if not thousands, of rabbis over who also have falsely attributed names, by the way, in some cases, but over hundreds of years. And the fact that on one page in the Talmud, there's one rabbi giving his negative opinion about Christians or about Jesus does not reflect on the Jewish world at large. That's a very easy answer to give, but no, they have to die on that hill for some reason. Yeah, I think I'm always going to be discussing Jewish content. It's the world that I came from and I know well, and I think a lot of the attitude of Jewish people towards Christianity, this is what I grew up in, stems from those. The rabbis said so. This is the take. This is the stance in the community. This is what we believe in, and so Christianity wrong. And there's no um, you'd have to believe that on faith claims that the rabbinical stance is correct, purely on faith. In terms of number of books in the Bible, do you think the Protestant is closer to the Orthodox Jews for Old Testament than Catholics? I think that the current canon obviously lines up with Protestants and Jews closer together, but I think there is obvious reason to believe that the Catholic canon is the correct canon, and that it's for polemical reasons that Jews today reject some of those books. Am I Messianic or Christian posing as an Orthodox Jew? Have you not been listening? Did you just pop in to say something stupid? What do you mean posing? Am I posing as an Orthodox Jew? I'm not an Orthodox Jew. I grew up Orthodox Jewish. I lived most of my life to this point as an Orthodox Jew. I'm not posing as an Orthodox Jew. Do you see kippah? No tzitzit. Not pretending to be something. Do you have any questions? Do you want to come on debate about something? Or do you just want to make a stupid comment and then leave? Let's wait for this genius. Is the genius going to answer, or just say the stupid comment and leave? Where do these people come from, man? Catholics, Orthodox Christians added to the Bible that was not meant to be authoritative canon. I mean, so the book of Sirach is rejected by Jews because they claim it's perverted and distorted by the Greek-speaking Gentiles. Do you, as a Christian, think that that is a valid reason to dismiss a book of Scripture because the Jews say it's perverted by Greek-speaking Gentiles? I don't think you want to make that claim. Yeah, and this rabbi in the video will make the claim that it's not talking about Jesus. Just say somebody in the Talmud said something stupid. Conversation over. By the way, for the guy wondering if I'm actually Jewish, I pointed out at the beginning, you see the Restream logo? I'm using the free version of the software. It's proof that I'm actually Jewish. Very cool. I wish I hadn't had such a delay. I don't know if it was a setting that I could do where I could turn off the delay, because I see people laughing at my joke a minute later. See? This is the problem with the delay. I got to figure out how to do that next time. Less of a delay. I thought it was awesome when I saw the Wes Huff Billy Carson interview, and he apparently knows manuscripts really well. I've heard him say some stupid things. Wow, I'm not even going to address that here because I don't have anything prepared to talk about, but wow. Yeah, my opinion is that both the rebellion in 70 AD that caused the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and then the later Bar Kokhba revolt. I personally think that there's reason to believe that that was instigated by certain rabbinic authorities that wanted that to happen to eliminate certain other groups and consolidate power. That's my personal take. There's historical reason to believe that, not necessarily historical proof. So why leave the faith? I mean, I've explained that in several videos. You can go watch my videos on the topic. Um, I've also explained it heavily in this video, in this stream as well, which is why I don't understand why pop in and make a statement like the one that you made if you weren't paying attention or don't know what's going on. I'm still wondering if Sint is gonna, the Levite Green Beret physicist is gonna come on and prove me wrong about anything, but okay. The reason I don't address Islam so much is purely because I'm not the most knowledgeable person in the topic. I know why I wouldn't believe in Islam. I think it's pretty obvious also, but I don't necessarily have the education or background to articulate that properly. And there are people online who do that very, very well. So I would defer to them until I know more about it. And I don't know necessarily that it's ever going to be a field that I'm an expert on or want to address in that way. I'm simply not knowledgeable enough. But I do think that there are some pretty blatant and obvious claims. If you listen for about 5 minutes to David Wood, God Logic, there are some pretty obvious things that stand out almost immediately. Schedule a proper debate on what topic? What do you want to debate on? And why don't you want to just come on and have a conversation about it? Yeah, this is when people are like, you don't know what you're talking about. I always stay in my lane. I try to avoid talking about anything that I don't know enough about. Yeah, Wes Huff is a very educated guy. He says some things on doctrine that are clearly just because that's his personal view and his belief, and he says them and sometimes contradicts himself. But yeah, to say that he doesn't know what he's talking about, yeah, but to also claim Catholics are heretical is also a pretty low IQ, buddy. It's funny, the Catholics wouldn't say you're not really Christian, but you say the Catholics are not Christian. That's yeah, I'm using the free version. You'll know when I'm officially converted out of Judaism because I'll pay for the full version of the software. No, I probably will pay for the full version of the software or the other one, whatever it's called, StreamYard. If I do this more often, I'm testing it out, so I didn't pay for it. But yeah, proof of background that if I'm just testing it out, I wouldn't pay for the full version until I know what I'm getting. Correct. Wes Huff can be a great historian and still get things wrong. Again, it depends on whose opinion. Okay, this is ridiculous. If you follow Singer, you're either a Baal Tshuva or you're a Noahide, or as I call them, dumb as rocks. The most intellectually lazy belief system that exists. Tuvia Singer is dishonest and has been cited by other anti-missionary rabbis as perverting Jewish beliefs for the sake of polemics against Christianity. I'm not sure that was specifically about him, but about some of the things that he says. Yeah, let's maybe if anyone wants to have something to say about the video or the stream, maybe we can ask some questions about that or personal questions for me. But if it's just going to get into attacking different groups of people, then maybe we should lay off on that. Yeah, something like that. No, it's a distortion of my actual last name. So that's not the full last name. I just wanted to do something that was similar, but not exactly. So I actually, before I was interested in Christianity, and I was wondering why people believe certain things that they do, was introduced to Tuvia Singer, had a conversation with him. He had all the things that he wanted to say about Christianity ready, and then when I asked him about rabbinic Judaism, booted out the door, ran out real quick, didn't want to have that conversation. So I wonder why that is. I wonder why he doesn't address that Chabad has messianic beliefs that are akin to some versions of Christianity, and that they're not demonized just because we're in the modern world today. So they're not attacked the same way that early Christians were. He avoids the topic of why rabbinic Judaism has certain beliefs and why there's differences and so on. And he just doesn't. Don't trust a snake, buddy. Just don't trust a snake. Yes, I'm aware that maíz is corn in Spanish. Yeah, I was getting that feeling also, but I wouldn't say it definitively. I think maybe just a troll. Cool story, bro. Okay, valid reason. Yeah, I don't do these often. I'm going to try to do it more often, but I'm probably going to address things that I want to address. I don't know necessarily that there's another time that we're going to be able to debate on things. You haven't even said a topic of debate that you want to debate, so I don't think that's going to happen. Just realistically. Rabbinical singer? What do you mean by that? Yeah, the chat's on a delay, it looks like. Still trying to figure out, is there a way? Yeah, I can't change anything at this point, but there appears to be a better setting I could have used. Okay. Can you show me a verse in the Bible where it's called heresy or explicitly forbidden to pray for intercession? Just because you decided that it's bad? Oh, he just wants to see how Jewish I am. Okay. Yeah. I already addressed that. Talk to all the other people that have already the non-nobodies that I've already addressed that with, who already know better than you do. So does anyone have any questions about the video that we discussed in the stream or anything? I have it on slow mode, so 40 seconds between, but it seems there's also a delay. So if I say something, by the time you guys hear it, I guess there's a little bit of a delay, and then the slow mode stops you from answering fast enough. Do you think that the rabbis of the first century practiced pagan Roman practices of a later Christian church? Because that's what you'd have to be insinuating here. Because the rabbis of the first century explicitly talk about going to cemeteries to pray to the righteous dead for intercession. So you'd have to think that already before Christianity, that was already a pagan practice that influenced all of the Jewish world. Yeah, the Orthodox Jewish world looks at the Reformed Jewish world as incredibly goofy and silly and not authentically Jewish, though they'll say that they are authentic Jews, meaning ethnically, culturally, they might be Jewish. They might be Jews by an Orthodox standard, but Reformed Judaism is not a Jewish thing in the eyes of Orthodox Jews. So in the book of Jeremiah, Rachel, who is long dead at that point, weeping for her children at their oppression at the hands of the Babylonians, and praying to God in heaven, or actually at her tomb, Baramah at the heights, where she's buried, would indicate at least that the dead in heaven can hear the suffering of people on earth, and can intercede for them. And what's interesting about that verse is also that Rachel is not the mother of Israel. She's the mother of two tribes, and it's not even the tribe that she's a mother of that's being oppressed at that point. So what does that sound like to you? Like, I get why you wouldn't want to believe in intercession of saints, or why you wouldn't subscribe to that, or why you don't want to do it, but to call other Christians who believe in the same God as you heretics for something that's not forbidden in any way seems extreme to me. Okay, so again, somebody who's long dead praying to God on the behalf of others, able to weep in heaven for those people. Well, you should have come on the God Logic stream that we did. That would have been the better time to do it, but I'm sure at some point we'll get there. Yeah, you are speaking from your rear end. I'm sorry, where's the third temple mentioned that has to explicitly be built? Where does it say the Messiah sins? So this was definitely a bit of a stumbling block for me. It was explained to me a lot better. Not that, again, something that I can articulate well, but I don't have an issue with the idea of the Pope. That's all I'll say on that. Again, I do want to reiterate, I'm not a Catholic apologist or a Christian apologist. I am talking about Rabbinic Judaism and the problems in Rabbinic theology. The video was about this conversation with this rabbi. If anyone has more questions about that, I'd be happy to answer. If not, I guess we can call it a day. I'm going to wait for anyone that might have some other relevant questions left, and then we'll do this again. So the question is whether or not what Pope Francis said, or are you talking about what Pope Francis said or what Vatican II says? Because both were explained to me. I'm not going to try to re-articulate what was told to me about Vatican II and why that's relevant. About Pope Francis saying that even if he said something in error that's not an official teaching of the church, what would that matter, and how would that invalidate the papacy or the Catholic Church? And two, I don't think that's exactly what was being said or articulated. So I don't really have an answer for you there because I don't think you're quoting that correctly. It wasn't a critique directly of Singer. It was a critique of somebody else using the same argument about Isaiah 53. The other anti-missionary rabbi, I believe, was Emmanuel Shochet, talking about how Isaiah 53 is explicitly about the Messiah, and to say otherwise is a distortion of Jewish beliefs for the sake of polemics against Christianity. And again, I think people may be popping in are not aware that I'm not a Christian apologist, and this is not even the topic of conversation, but you guys decided to fight about it in the chat. Yeah. So if the topic of the chat has changed to Christians just attacking each other, I think we're going to call it a night. And if anyone has any questions about Rabbinic Judaism, feel free to comment on the stream or on the video or on my other videos. And have a good night, everyone. Try to be nicer to each other next time. Not calling each other heretics and stuff.